Alright, let's get started with layouting concepts. In this section, we'll be discussing Vaadin's component hierarchy and how Vaadin UIs are composed from the nested components. We will take a closer look into the most commonly used layouts called horizontal and vertical layout that allow aligning components with vertical and horizontal orientation. As the layouting and component sizing are major concepts with Vaadin, we'll also talk about the component sizing and expand ratio. In the mentioned video, we will clearly establish the difference between the size of the component and the space reserved for the component. Finally, we'll be looking into different types of layout debugging tools, both from Vaadin Framework and Chrome browser. With the debug tools, we can access the concrete HTML DOM structure that Vaadin generates as a result of using components. Let's first begin by looking into layout components and layout hierarchies. In Vaadin, every component is an implementation of component interface. This super interface declares the very foundation of each component and is the base type from which everything else inherits from. The UIs with Vaadin are composed from components, and layouts work in a way where components are nested into one another by creating hierarchies. In order to support hierarchies, Vaadin declares component container interface that has the capability of adding other components into it. Component container has few implementations which don't exactly declare layouting concepts but allow adding child components in various form into them. These are, for example, tab sheet, accordion, and split panel components. With tab sheet and accordion, the child components are the tabs of the sheet, while with split panel, the children are the first and the second component of the split. For certain special cases, Vaadin also declares single component container interface, which is, as the name says, capable of containing exactly one child component. An example of this is a panel, which purpose is to provide scroll bars for its inner content in case the child component's dimensions would exceed the size of the panel. In addition of these components, Vaadin defines an interface called layout. It's basically empty marker interface with few sub-interfaces that provide additional layouting capabilities. These are, for example, unified margins and spacing in between the components, as well as the ability to declare component alignment inside reserved space, if any should exist. Layout interface is further implemented by various layout components, such as the vertical and horizontal layout, as well as CSS, grid layout, and absolute layout. Out of these, the most commonly used layouts are the vertical and horizontal layout, as well as the CSS layout. As the name suggests, these vertical and horizontal layouts simply align the components vertically or horizontally, while with the CSS layout, developer needs to use CSS in order to align the contained components. Out of these, the CSS layout is clearly the most performative, as it utilizes browser's native layouting functionality with CSS. Other layouts, like grid and absolute layout, are used more rarely, but they are a good reference if they should ever be needed. In this video, we quickly walk through the Vaadin's component container hierarchy and identified a couple of main concepts: component container, single component container, and layout interfaces. We also briefly mentioned all Vaadin's core layout components and gave some insight into when they should be used. These were the vertical, horizontal, CSS, grid, and absolute layout. We also understood that with Vaadin, all UIs are composed by using and nesting components, and that layouts are also considered as components.